do a recap of what we discussed in the last class. So, in the last session, last Sunday that we discussed, we were talking about this case study called Camera Manufacturing Company, wherein we kind of created a financial model from the scratch, built various schedules, took the assumptions, and finally completed the model to have the P&L balance sheet and cash flow completed. And after completing that, we also kind of discussed a couple of other things in that model. We used the financial model for conducting business valuation using DCF. So we discussed this concept of free cash flows computation and how the concept of time value of money is used for conducting DCF valuation. Now, what we could not discuss in the last class was related to the relative sensitivity analysis. So the first 1 hour I'm going to spend on discussing the concepts related to the relative valuation and the sensitivity analysis. But before moving there, I see a couple of you have got some questions which you might want to ask. So you could just put your questions on the chat window. So Prachi, we discussed the DCF valuation. The file number 9 was related to the DCF valuation. So on the last Sunday, the file number 9 that we discussed, that was on the DCF valuation. I'm just going to open that file. Please have a look at it. And Abhijit, in the meanwhile, if you have any questions, please let me know. I see your chat that you have some questions. Please let me know. And this is the file number 9 that we discussed last time, which is basically the discounted cash flow valuation methodology. Okay, so Abhijit, your question is that if we compute the terminal value that is already discounted, so why do we basically discount it again? Okay, it's a very good question. The point is that here, when we try to compute the terminal value, intent is basically to find out the present value of all the future cash flows starting from 2024 onwards. So the cash flow that we expect in 2024 will be discounted over here. The cash flow in 2025 will be discounted again over here. So what happens is that all the discounted values are at the end of the horizon period. So here the horizon period is 2023. All of these cash flows are at the end of this particular year, 2023, which means that we still have to bring it back by 5 more years. And that's why we discount it again. Because the way this terminal value formula works is that you kind of take the future number and bring it back to the horizon period completion. So if the horizon period is completing on 2023, then that's how you do the discount. So just in case you see that you notice that there is a double discounting, it is not really the case because the discounting in the first instance in terminal value is only being done till the year 2023 in this example. So there is a need to do this discounting again for 5 more. All right. Let me see a few more questions here. So, Riddhi, your question is that for the FCFF, when we consider cash flow from investments, we are to consider only the capex or the capital work in progress and no other investing items like the investments that we are doing in the non-core assets or any sort of dividend income that we generate from those investments. That's true because the point is, let's say if I'm doing the valuation of this company, which is Camera Manufacturing Company. And I took this example before as well that let's say this company has got huge cash and it decides to park its money in, let's say, the shares of Reliance Industries Limited or Dabur India Limited or maybe some other company which is listed. And I buy shares of that company. Now, that particular company or that particular investment for Camera Manufacturing Company is a non-core investment. And any such non-core investment is not to be considered in from the operations, right? So what we capture here in the FCFF is basically the real cash flow that we generate from operations. We expect from those non-core investments, and for that matter, anything else as well. So what we do when we do the valuation, we arrive at a final value, which is enterprise value of the company that we are trying to value, and on the top any non-core investment. So if there is any other investment, we will add it back out here. Like you see, I'd mentioned it in row number 31 that you add not only the cash and the bank balance, but also the fixed deposits, the mutual fund investments, and any other kind of non-core investment like the investment in the shares of some other company that you've done, you will add it over here. Whatever is the real value of that, you would do it here. Now you might wonder that in my books I'm having 1 lakh shares of Reliance Industries Limited. So how do I take the value for it? So it's up to you. One, it is already a quoted investment, so you know the market price of that particular asset. You can take the latest market price and multiply it by number of shares that you hold. That will kind of give you the current value of that investment that you should be taking. And in case that is unquoted, then that means you will need to do a separate valuation for that investment and then multiply it with the percentage stake that you hold. Now, if I hold 20-30% stake, then it actually makes sense to do a detailed valuation of that particular unquoted investment. But if you hold just about 0.5% or 1% stake in that company, probably it is not worth it to go there. So we would straight away take it at the historical value. This is what we typically do when we do the valuation in the real life scenario. Okay. What about any sort of intangible acquisitions? Now, what do you mean by acquisitions? Does it mean that you're talking about any kind of acquisition that you've done in past? If that's related to the core business, then that intangible acquisition would invariably be helping you to increase your operating cash. So that would automatically be captured here because whatever is related to your business operations, like I see your question that if a company acquires patents for the brand building or something like that. Now, is that patent a tradable patent, or the patent is going to help you increase your operating income? Logically, what happens is that if there is a pharmaceutical company and it procures a patent for for manufacturing some sort of a medicine, impact of that is seen in the higher operating income because then you will be able to have more and more revenue out of it and probably at virtually no cost. So that helps you indirectly to, not indirectly, in fact, that helps you directly to increase your operating income. So the value of that is automatically captured in this. But if it is more like a trading thing that you would like to sell to somebody else who could do it on your behalf or you could do it instead of you, then you would take the value of it by doing a separate brand valuation for it or a patent valuation for it. Right? Okay. So Prachi, how we practically calculate the cost of debt? The companies got corporate bonds. See, what happens is if the bonds are traded, then you look at the bond yield. For a traded bond, for a listed bond, for a debenture, you look at the bond yield or the current yield which is there in the market. That becomes the basis for you. Or if it is not the case, then you look at if it is a case of a normal loan that you've taken from the financial institutions or the bank, then you take the effective interest cost on it. So if let's say I took this example that the company has taken $100 million loan at 10% and another $200 million loan at 12%, what you would do, you would try to figure out what is the weighted average interest cost. Compute that 10% of 100 is 10 million and 12% of 200 is 24 million. So the total interest is 34 million on a base of 300, which translates to an effective interest cost of 11.3 and subtracting 30% tax rate from it, if that's the tax rate assumption, then it will give you a post-tax cost of debt of 7.9%. So this is how we typically compute the cost of debt practically. Okay, so Prachi, another question that you got is related to the risk premium for a small company or a private company. What happens is this is basically there is a bit of subjectivity involved here. What happens is this, as an investor, I have to invest my money, and I'm looking to park my money in, let's say, some sort of a FMCG company. Now, I've got one company which is Dabur, which is an FMCG company, or an ITC or HUL, and all of these FMCG companies are listed. But let's say there is this new startup or a new FMCG company which has come in the market, and it is pretty big, but in terms of the relative size, if you speak about it, then compared to ITC, HUL, Dabur, it is very small. So as an investor, if I have to put my money in that small company, I would be a little reluctant to park my money at the same cost of equity because I'm not going to, get any additional benefit out of it unless and until I assign an extra premium for that. So what happens in these cases is that you're taking some sort of a small size premium. You could also say that if this is being added to make sure that you are able to compare the various companies of different sizes. So if there is a company which is of pretty big size and there is another company which is of a small size, then the chances are that the big company would be a little stable in the market because it has already reached a certain stage. But a small company is in the stage of being developed, so there is additional risk involved over there. So we take some sort of a small size premium. There is another thing which is basically taken, and that's called illiquidity discount, right? Illiquidity discount, because if there is a publicly listed company, then you can sell off your investment at any point in time because there is a ready market for it. There is a stock market wherein you can go and sell your shares that you hold in those companies. But if there is a company which is private, then there is some sort of illiquidity. And for that illiquidity, you again add some sort of additional premium. So what happens eventually is that you end up taking some sort of a CSRP, which is company specific risk premium. Now I see this question that what number should we assign over here? It is very, very subjective. There is a lot of subjectivity involved here. Uh, there is no objective process or a formula which can help us determine that what should be the right amount of premium. So there have been studies and researches which have been done which indicate that on an average, the small companies or unlisted companies tend to generate a return which is slightly more, or let's say which is 2%, 3% more than the comparables which are listed or big. But again, as I said, this is very, very subjective. So I would rather assign probably somewhere between 2 to 5%. So somewhere between 2 to 5% is a normal range which is typically taken. What we end up doing, because we need to justify that why we are doing it. So for that we need to have a solid understanding of the business, and that's how we justify that why 2% and why not 5%, or why 5%, why not a lower. So if the company is pretty small, has got some other risk elements involved into it, then probably I would take a higher number. And for a relatively stable company, I would probably take a lower number in the CSR. Right? I personally tend to take a number between 2 to 5%. That's the typical standard. So for a company which is let's say very small, a 5% could be justifiable. And this is actually the logic which is used by the venture capitalists and the private equity funds as well. They say that if we are putting money in a company startup or which is in early stage investment, then there is huge amount of risk involved. So the company specific risk premium in that case could be as high as. So that's why this is very subjective. It depends on the stage at which the company is in terms of generating the operating cash. That's how we decide on this. But again, there's no standard rule. So the ideal projection period for a startup matured enterprise or a matured enterprise with no growth, no profit is, see, Abhijit, the point is that if I speak about a company which is pretty big, matured, and now it is not growing at an abnormal rate, probably 3 to 5 years would be a fair period. Like if you speak about a company which is already pretty big, has reached a certain level. Now, in terms of the product life cycle, in terms of the business life cycle, obviously there is a stage when the company would only be able to grow at a very small growth rate because the company has already reached that level. It cannot enjoy the abnormal profit every year. So probably for a for a matured company, 3 years to 5 years could be a good period. For a for a company which is not yet reached maturity or a startup company, you need to look at when the company is able to achieve that level when it is going to break even. And after it breaks even, then you would see if in the next 3 to 4 years the company is kind of stabilizing, it's expected to stabilize its operation or not. And when I say stabilizing, it means a growth rate less than 10% per annum. So if it is going to grow at a rate of let's say less than 10% per annum, you could say that now it has reached that level. When you create the projections, then you look at a couple of factors. Number one, that when the company is able to break even, and number two, after it breaks even, when it is expected to grow at the normal rate, which is just a single digit growth rate, not a double digit. Then you would decide that okay, this company I need to stop over here, which could be 10 years, 15 years as well. Right? So there have been companies wherein I've considered projections for the next 15 years. So that's how you actually decide after looking at the projections. Prachi, for valuing a school, which is a very safe business, should we only be taking the risk-free rate plus a small premium? See, the thing is, I wouldn't say that it is the safest business, because the point is the safest investment, I would say, is when you invest in the bonds of the government of India, if you're talking about investing in India, because that's the risk free asset. But whenever you do any business, there is a bit of riskiness involved out there. So you would need a portion towards the equity risk premium as well. So the way we compute CAPM, you would go with that. Probably what may happen that, in that case, the company specific risk premium may not be that big, or maybe it could even be taken as zero, because it is a very safe investment, as you rightly said. But in the beginning, you have to actually spend some time to recover your capex, because it involves huge amount of capital expenditure in the beginning to set up a school. So that's a factor which you would need to capture. And by rule, anyways, if you talk about a school, there could be a possibility that it is being not a possibility. In fact, every time you would notice that it is a not for profit organization. That's how it is registered. And if that's the case, you would notice that the company is just charging an amount in terms of fees, which is forming your revenue, which is just equal or sufficient enough to break even. But obviously, all of us know that that's not the real life scenario. Aman, your question is there a standard model for valuing IP or patents? See, there is no, there are, if I speak about the terminologies, there are many methods which speak about it. But logically, if you look at it, there is a new patent that you have developed. Let's say there is this company who has developed a new patent or new product for which it has got a patent. Now, how would you value it? Let's say you have decided to sell off that particular patent to a third party. Now, how would third party pay you? A third party would look at the commercial aspect of it as to what is the typical market that it will be able to address by that product has been patented, and using that product, what is the probable free cash flows that you will be able to generate in the next couple of years. And if there is a particular life for that patent, let's say there is a fixed life of 5 years after which it will be open, then you would see that in the next 5 years, what's the level of income that I'll be able to generate out of it, and the present value of that will give you the valuation of patent. That's how we actually work on it, right? So there are these valuations of the intellectual property rights. You have the valuation of a license. You have a valuation of something else, wherein we look at the periodicity of it as to what is the life of that particular IP. If the life is 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, then we see that during those 5 7 years under which it is going to be patented, or there is nobody else is going to enter the market, what level of profit I will be able to generate, and that extra cash flows would help you determine the value of that particular IP. Now, Abhijit, you have asked a question which is pertinent in the current scenario, that what valuation method do you recommend during the current COVID crisis, and what should be the projection horizon? The method doesn't change, because DCF is based on going concern assumption. And today also, if we are trying to value a company, we will take the same as it's going to be run forever. We do not have any intention to close down a business. But what could probably change is that, number one, your projections might go down, because you would witness that because of this issue, the way we were doing business before, that may not be the situation anymore. So our projections may need to be revised downwards. But again, it depends on the industries. You would see that the pharmaceutical companies would witness an increase in valuation as well, because they would be able to generate more income during this time. But there could also be a possibility that the companies like some company which is into the hotel, which is running a hotel, then over there in the next 1 year, for sure, their occupancy is going to be very, 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 very less, or probably could also be zero in a couple of months. So what that means is that projections need to be revised downwards. But does it mean that the situation, if I work on a model like this, let's say I talk about a hotel, and does it mean that I should close down my business today itself? Probably not, because even everybody who is running that business would be having in his mind that this problem that I'm facing right now is only temporary. Now, what's the definition of that temporary? There is a subjectivity involved there. I don't know whether this problem is going to be there for the next 3 months, next 6 months, next 1 year. I don't know. So it's more of an assumption. right? Like I was just doing the valuation of a company which is into real estate. And over there, what we did, the company has reduced its cash flows by 50% in this year. Because their point is that we are giving waiver of rent for 3 months, and there are a couple of tenants who are leaving or who are vacating the property. But they have taken just a 20% cut in the next year and 10% cut in 3 years later, 2 years later. And after that, they've taken the same projection that they were using 6 months back in the pre COVID scenario. So the perspective that they're trying to give is that they're saying that everything will come back to normal in 1 years to 2 years time. So I will need to come back or bring my projections back to this point. So the point is there is no standard rule. You look at the industry, look at the perspective and color it with your assumption because the way you perceive how that industry is going to be behaving in those times. Now, there is definitely a subjectivity element involved. Now, assume that tomorrow, while we are speaking, if just tomorrow we get a news that there is a vaccine which is available and everything is going to be all right in the next 2 months, 3 months time, then there is no basis of reducing any valuations at all today. If I'm pretty sure about it, right? So the thing is that it all depends. Valuation is always a point in time exercise. That it depends on the perspective that you have at a particular point in time when you are doing the valuation. So if after some time, 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 1 year, you get to know that the situation has changed drastically or it has changed altogether, you need to revisit the assumptions one more time and change the projections. But what we are doing right now as a valuer, if you notice that the companies have not reduced their projections versus what they were using in the pre-COVID scenario, then we are taking an extra premium in the cost of capital. Because the point is that if the company is not assuming that there will be a dip in projection, that is probably not a fair assumption. So for us, it would make sense that we reduce the projections a little bit. If that's not the case, probably take some bit of risk element in the cost of capital, right? So Abhijit, yes, we should ideally wait. It is definitely prudent to wait for some time to get some clarity, but then there's no fixed timeline for it. That if I say that wait for 2 months and then decide, probably that's not a valid answer because we don't know when that problem is going to get over. So it all depends on when you get clarity. Then only you will be able to do justice to the projection that, right? So I hope it answers most of the questions which have been asked. If there is a pharmaceutical company, Vishaki, I'm reading your question, which is having a patent for a medicine that is expiring in next 10 years and the company does not have any other products, should the going concern assumption be questioned? Definitely yes. If you do not have any other business to do, then obviously it is going to be questioned. Now, but what I could do in that case, I would assume that I would run it on a going concern basis because the patent is there for only 10 years, but probably the disease that it is curing is going to be there forever. So if there is if there is a medicine that I talk about, let's say a paracetamol or a ibuprofen, now that is something which is a generic medicine which is being used everywhere across the globe for a normal fever as well. So what happens is that even after the patent for a particular medicine is over, there is quite a bit of possibility that you would still have an addressable market for it. Now, what may happen that if you were selling this medicine for say 10 rupees a tablet, you will only be able to sell it for 1 rupee a tablet after 10 years. So that ways your projections will go down, but obviously the going concern entity may still be there. But as I said, it depends on the situation. If you feel that it is only for a period, like I speak about a polio medicine, now it's being given administered to everybody and after to all the kids who are being born. And after a certain stage, obviously the level of vaccine which is being used would also go down in terms of consumption. Now, there could be, I mean, I'm just taking an assumption. But if you have better clarity about it, then you can revisit your projections in line, right? So there are a lot of questions. There are a few more that does the share price affect the equity value and vice versa? No, not really. Share price, share price is actually the valuation. Now, what happens is that when we do valuation, we do the fundamental analysis and we arrive at a value. But the share market is like very volatile because it just does not run on the basis of fundamentals in the short run. If I say, would it be right to say that in the long term, the share market works in line with the valuation that we typically do? The answer is yes. But does it behave the same way in the short term? Probably not. So in the short term, I would say that no. The share market price does not indicate the value of the company in true sense, right? Because yeah, so Richie, your point is right that it discounts very quickly and sometimes it discounts without any reason. So if it was if the logic of the DCF that we're discussing here was so true, and that the share market also applies, then the share prices wouldn't be changing so drastically every day. So one day you see a 10% up, the price is up, and the other day you see it is 10% down. So it would not have behaved in that particular fashion, right? But yeah, if there is a lot of volatility and you need to look at the historical data, then your volatility related elements like beta factors and all that stuff would get impacted, right? So Venkat, your question is, does the accounting period change sometime? So the accounting period usually for an Indian company is April to March, and the reason for this is that the income tax computations and the other filings that you do with the ROC and others are usually aligned to this period only, which most of the companies tend to follow in India. But does it mean that the companies cannot take any other accounting period for the purpose of reporting? No, they can. They can take it. But in that case, they would have to create separate books of accounts for the purpose of income tax accounting as well, because that would require you to, file your income tax on the basis of uh, April to March, and then you have to go through the proper process which has been prescribed under the Companies Act 2013. So you would need to go through that process mechanism, take the requisite approvals, and then only you proceed with it, right? But if there is a bit of other reason like you are going to discontinue a business or you have just started a business during a particular year, then again, as I said in the Companies Act, there are exceptions given to it, which cover the. So Zayan, you can how do we value a partnership firm? So that's your DCF. You could do that. What is the source of obtaining data of market return and terminal growth rate? So market return, you could basically look at the historical data. So probably if you look at the last 20 years Sensex point or last 30 years Sensex point, that could give you a good basis to figure out the market return. And for the terminal growth rate, there is no standard, to be honest. So what it depends is that the logic here is that in the long run, all the companies which are operating in a country would align to the average growth rate. So that average growth developing country like India could be somewhere between 3 to 4 or 5%, but for a country like US, it could be as low as 2%, 1 to 2%, right? So another question that you got, Venikat, is that in the corporate real estate, the rental income or the lease income impacts for a gap of 2 to 3 months. Yeah, so true. That's what I said. So in real estate, most of the companies have actually, given waiver of the rental for 2 to 3 months or 4 month period, and then some other companies, real estate companies, have given a 50% waiver for 6 months or 12 month period. So there are different waivers which have been given by different real estate companies just to make sure that the tenants do not vacate the property, because their point is that they are happy having it vacant for a longer period. That's the perspective that they've got. Okay, so I think we have covered more. I've covered most of the questions. There was one question that Richie, you had the consumer goods and the FMCG need to be specifically valued. Yes, right. They are actually in high demand. So that's why you notice that most of the FMCG companies are basically trading at close to their 52-week high. All right, I think broadly I've covered all the questions. Broadly, I've covered most of the questions. So let's proceed ahead. Okay, so Prachi, your point is the risk-free rate keeps changing, so the company valuation also keeps changing. So the fundamental rule to valuation is it is always a point in time exercise. The value that you're trying to compute as of today will decide the assumptions that you take. So if today I have to do the valuation, probably I would look at the risk rate that's close to, in fact, I was just looking at it, it is close to 5.8% now. And it used to be 6.5% 6 months back. So it keeps on changing. So when you do the valuation, you look at this rate at that point in time. So obviously, when you go ahead, the risk-free rate could be different and it could change the dynamics of the valuation altogether. So in the model, you basically do valuation the way you do by considering the situation at the point in time when you are doing this valuation. But if you believe that this is going to change, like I do a small adjustment in terms of the company specific risk premium. So what I do that there is this company specific risk premium that I'm applying as 5% right now, but obviously it cannot be so high forever period because this company is small today. This company is having certain problems today, but it wouldn't be there forever. So probably after 5 years, after 10 years, I would remove that, or while computing the terminal value, instead of taking 5% company specific risk premium into the cost of capital, I would take probably 2.5%, which is 2%. So that's a personal judgment of the valuer which is taken for adjusting the valuation and making it logical. So that's what you typically do. So I personally actually adjust it in the terminal value, because in the terminal value again you have to use cost of capital, and I don't take that 5% CSRP in the terminal value. I adjust it a little bit downwards. All right. So I think this answers your point, Prachi. Great. Now let's move on to the 10th, file number 10. Now, here we're going to talk about the relative valuation, and to be honest, the kind of discussions that we've had in the fundamental valuation covering the DCF, we wouldn't have too many discussions around it, because it is not a, I wouldn't say that it is a bad method, but it is not a scientifically proven method, because what it says is that if a company X, who is my competitor, is valued at this price, then I should be valued at a similar price. That's the logic behind it. So if I have to buy a flat in one of the localities, I would look at the price at which the other flats have been sold in that locality and use that as a basis for valuation. So if there is this other flat of 1,000 square feet which was sold for 50 lakh rupees, then I would say that this other flat in the same locality should also be valued at almost the same price. If not exactly same, then probably almost the same. So that's what the concept of relative valuation is. So what it does is that it says that if you have to value, let's say, your camera manufacturing company, then you look at the trading multiples of the other companies which are probably listed, or you look at the deal multiples at which the deal has happened in the recent past in the market. All right. So what we do here, we've got two broad methods over here. One is called the trading comps, and the second is called transaction comps. The difference between these two is that in the trading comps, you look at the trading multiples. So look at the trading multiples of the listed entities. Whatever entities are listed, you basically use their multiples and use it for the basis of your own. Use it as a basis to do your own valuation. So, like if you see here, the perspective is that if the company A, B, C, D, E are listed, then you would know their valuation. Why? Because if these are listed, then you know what their valuation is. And on the top of it, even if they are not listed, let's say they are unlisted, but as a valuer, as a company, I'm already covering the valuations of those other companies also, right? So I'm working in, let's say, Goldman Sachs, and I'm covering this particular industry which is into camera manufacturing, and there are companies like A, B, C, D, E which are into the same line of business. And I've done the DC evaluation of these companies in past. Very recently, I've concluded their report. So what could happen? Looking at their valuation, I'll be able to come up with these multiples. Or if these are listed, then I could look at the trading multiples by going to the website of the stock exchange and getting the details about it. So what we do over here, probably the future multiples you could only get if you have the forecast available for those companies. Like I said, if I'm working in an investment bank and I'm covering these companies, I would have the forecast available for it. Otherwise, if you have access to some of the data sources like Bloomberg, now Bloomberg gives you the consensus estimate. The consensus estimate is that it would get the details about the future projections of a particular company given by one investment bank, the second investment bank, the third investment bank, and then taking an average to be able to come to a consensus point. So using those multiples related to the valuation, you can use them for the valuation of your own company. Like EV to sales is basically enterprise value to sales multiple, which means that if your sales is 100 and your EV to sales multiple is 2.5, then 250 is your valuation. That's what it does, right? So what you could do, you could take an average of the multiples, because just one single company would not make sense and you should be using a sufficient sample. And in terms of average, you could use normal simple average, Or if you want, you could use a locational average or positional average, which is called median as well. But when you take the simple average, please be aware of this fact. There could be a possibility that there are some outliers. So please ignore the outliers. You shouldn't be taking the outliers because those are totally out of the range and it doesn't make sense to cover them. So like over here, if I show you, if I have to pick the 2019 EV to sales multiple and I'm going to take the normal average, it's going to be this, which is roughly about 2.1. So you take the average of 2019 EV to sales multiple and that gives you the average EV to sales multiple of 2.1 times. And if I had used 2020, then it would have looked like this, roughly about 1.9 times. Right? So you either take an average of EV to sales or you take an average of EV to sales of 2020, which is 2-year forward multiple. Right? And what you have to do, you have to pick the sale of that particular year that your company is having and apply this multiple on it. So if I were to see, let me just compute the average right over here for all of these companies. So let's take an average out here. This is the average that I'm computing. And then, as I said, you could straight away call this value from here. Instead of just computing it every time, you could straight away pull this data from. So once you compute the average in this line, you can altogether call this formula or just call these values out here. Right? So this becomes 2.1 and 1.9. And what you do as a next step is, as I said before, if the 2.1 is the average multiple in the industry, you pick the sales that you expect your company to have in 2019. You go to the P&L, pick the sales that you expect to have in 2019, which is 703. Or if you look at 2020 sales, this is expected to be 658. Applying this multiple, you will be able to see that 703 into 2.1 is roughly about 1505. That's the expected valuation on the basis of 1-year forward multiple. And if you apply this multiple to on a 2-year forward sale, this comes to about 1220, which is $1.2 billion. Now, it would never give you a perfect value. Don't assume that EV to sales multiple is going to give you a single precise value, and EV to EBITDA would also give you exactly the same value. It's never going to be the case. It will always give you a different value in the various situations if you use the different multiples. So please make sure that you use the relative valuation only as a reference point. Don't use it to take a final decision. You always have to back it with the fundamental valuation, which is TCE. So use it only to cross-validate the final valuation that you're going to assign to a particular company. Because this could be a quick check. It could give you a broader reference, and then you might want to revisit your assumptions. So that's how this is used for revalidating the data. Okay, there's a question that Dipankar, in the Excel, is there a way to treat the outlier, for instance, 25% deviation outlier? So the thing is that, as I said, you could use a positional average, which is more like a median. If you use median, then it automatically ignores the lower bound outlier and the outer bound outlier. So that's how you could handle it. Or as a separate line, you could find out the positional average and then figure out the variations to it, and that will help you identify the outliers. Meaning, if the median is, let's say, 2.5, and then in the adjacent column you're comparing all of these values to 2.5, and anything which is beyond 20% you would ignore while using the normal average. So I would use an average if, when I would say average if the variation is between minus 20 to plus 20%, only then take the average of the base multiple. So I could do that. But for that, you would need a separate column to identify. Really, yes, the listed company multiples are available in the public domain. You could just go to the website of the stock exchange. It is given out there, but they would only tell you the latest multiple, not the future one. So the future multiples, obviously, you need access to some data sources. right? So Abhijit, this answers your point as well. What is in the E15? This is what I've put in the E15. I picked the sales of my own company for the year 2019. Now, what you need to do as a next step is that, just to be net debt, let me compute the net debt over here. I compute net debt over here, or if you want, you can compute the net debt over here as well. The perspective is that you have to capture the current net debt, because from the enterprise value, what we typically do is with current net debt position to be able to arrive at equity value. And equity value could be a loose term for market capitalization as well. If it is if you use the term related to the stock market, you could say that it's the equivalent of market cap. So you subtract the current net debt position. Now, for us, the latest current year is 2018. So I'm going to capture the net debt position of 2018. So it's going to be equal to, go to the balance sheet, 2018 total debt is given over here as 380. I'm going to fix that minus cash of 169. And I'm going to fix that as well. The reason for fixing it is that I want to make sure that I'm able to copy and paste it everywhere. So I could copy and paste it everywhere. That's why I have kind of fixed this particular cell. Right? Uh, I don't know. Have you lost my audio? All right. So maybe Kiran, you need to check some issue at your end. Okay, fine. Got that. All right. Now let me read a couple of questions. Abhishek, as I said, the latest multiples you could easily get from the website of Money Control, from the website of the stock exchange. All of these sources can be used to get the latest multiple. But if you need to look at the forward multiples, obviously you need access to paid data sources. Like when I used to work on these kind of valuations in my prior company, I used to use the Bloomberg as a source, which basically compiles the data from various sources. So that's a pretty powerful database, gives you a lot of information, but yes, at the same time, the license cost is pretty high. Now, Dipankar, your question is that are these multiples the same as money on money multiple of the LBO? See, in case of any valuation, not just LBO or anything, every time you do valuation, the multiples could be used. It could be used at the time of liquidation. It could be used at the time of acquisition. It could be used at the time of going for an acquisition by using the leverage kind of a debt, which you typically called as leverage buyout. So multiples could be anything, and it's basically the same stuff, right? Yes, Vishaki, this is the market multiple approach. But if you're using the forward multiples, then we are actually making a small adjustment here. Okay, so I think we are good. Let's proceed now. So we've got the net debt. Now the market cap or the equity value, as I said, is equal to EV minus net debt. That gives you the that gives you the market cap. So let me just put the formula here for your ease of reference. The formula that I'm putting in this cell, let me highlight them. They relate to the first row, this one. Yeah. Now, what do we do next? The share price, the expected price per share is going to be market cap into 10 raised to the power 6, because it's in the USD million, divided by 100 million shares. So please fix that, because I'm going to copy and paste this formula down. Right? So Venkat, why I have taken the net debt of the year 2018 is because we always take, look at this logic. We always take the current net debt position. We always take this. Because if I'm going to buy this company as of today, then I pay a certain price, but I also have to settle the current net debt position of the company. So this company on a net basis owes $211 million in terms of debt on a net basis after adjusting this for the cash that it has already got. So that's why we take the current net debt position of the company. No matter which year multiple we are talking about, we would always use the current net debt position. Right? Now using this logic, Abhijit, the difference implies that, as I said in the beginning, this approach, I personally don't rely too much on it because it is only going to give you a range of valuation, just an idea. And there is a possibility that in some other, if I use some other multiple, the same share price could look like $20 or it could look like $5 as well. Now there's no logic behind that why there is a big range because probably each of these peers that we are using may have a certain specific element attached to it, which basically doesn't come out if you simply use the multiples. That's why unless and until you use the fundamental valuation, which is DCF, can't really make any sense out of it. So probably this is more for a verification purpose instead of being used as a final data point for the purpose of valuation. Right? So using the same logic, you could do it for EV to EBITDA as well. I'm just going to quickly do that for you for the ease of reference. So 2019 EV to EBITDA is 15.8, 2020 is 14.9. Right? Now EBITDA 2019 is expected to be 84 and 2020 this EBITDA is expected to be 65. And the remaining cells that you see, you could straight away copy and paste it because this block on the right hand side covering the EV, net debt, equity value or a market cap and the share price, you could straight away copy and paste these 4 columns. So I've straight away pasted them across over here. Right, this is the formula. Now you see that the EV to sales multiple is giving you a range of 10 to 30, 10.1 to $12.9. And EV to EBITDA multiple is giving you a range of 7.5 to 11.2. So what you could do over here is say that on an average it appears that the valuation should be close to about $10.5. That's what it indicates. And there is a circularity, if you recollect, we spoke about it last time. So please make sure that you go to file options and enable the circular reference through here. So please click on enable iterative calculation so that the values are correct. So though there's no change, but just make sure that the iterative calculation functionality is activated when you're working on this file because there's already a circular reference out there. All right. Now, similarly, on the same lines, you could also use price to earning multiple. Price to earning multiple, the difference is that if I look at the PE multiple, it is 65 times or 93 times. Prachi, the circular reference is, it's not there in this file. Circularity was there when I discussed in some other file when we computed this part, there was the circularity. So I was just saying that please make sure that you enable that option, otherwise there is a possibility that file may not give you the right result. So that's why you need to enable it. So 2019 PE multiple is 65.9 and 2020 multiple is 93.1. Now the way the PE multiple works is that it doesn't require a sales EBITDA or something like that. You need to straight away pick the net profit because price to earning is nothing but the share valuation of the equity value divided by net profit after tax. Or you could also look at this on a per share basis, that it is share price divided by EPS. Now the second one is more to do with on a per share basis. So if you would like to use the second one, it will straight away give you the share price. So for that, you need to capture the EPS over here. Or if you do it at an overall level, then you're going to do it at the net profit level. So I'm going to look at the net profit of 2019, that is $13 million, and the next one is just $3 million. And post this, you simply multiply them, and finally you get the share price. Copy and paste this formula, and you see here that the PE multiple is telling you that the share price should only be $2.4. Now, if you only have to give with PE multiple, probably you wouldn't assign a value more than $8 or $9 at max. But there is a possibility that because of certain reasons, the price is the net profit is going down, while in future you're expecting that the profit is going to go up after some time. So using just the latest net profit or just 1 year forward or 2 year forward net profit may not be a good idea. That is why the DCF is the best, because it considers not just the latest 1 or 2 years of projections, but it captures the future period, the entire future period. That is why that method is considered the best. Now you would have understood that why I was saying that this only can give you a reference. It can never be a final decision point for us. Right? So Richie, my point is that here you see on the basis of P multiple, we are getting a value which is 2.4 or 8.8 at max. So the other multiples are giving you a value close to about $10 or $11. And this one is just saying that it should be between 2 to 8, right? So it can only give you a broad reference, because there is a possibility that because of certain XYZ reasons, my profit is down for a temporary period of next 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, not more than that. So that means that I may have to capture or give more weightage to the profit that I would generate 2 years down the line or 3 years down the line, rather than simply looking at the next 1 year or 2 years of profit, because there is a possibility that will take some time in terms of stabilizing the operation. So that's why the relative valuation is usually not the best method. It can be used only as a reference point, right? Yes, please, Richie, go on.
So my question is, why did we multiply the PAT with 65.9, which means that my market cap or my market value of my company will be 65 times of my PAT.
That's correct.
Right. So now where do we get this 65? It is a multiple from another company.
Yes. It is basically the average of the other companies. So like what we did for EV to sales and EV to EBITDA, we're doing the same stuff for PE multiple of other companies. Like this is a very common multiple which is used for listed players. You see that if I have to do the valuation, I could look at the PE multiple of other players in the market. And taking an average of that, which basically gives me the average industry PE of that particular industry, I would say that my company would also have a PE multiple closer to it. If my company is having a net profit of just $13 million and the multiple is 65.9, that tells me that the valuation of my company, the equity valuation of my company should be close to about 885, which translates to $8.8 per share of price.
So we need to be very choosy with selecting the comparables or the near to companies.
Not choosy, but very careful that we pick the right, player. Now, what happened was that I took this example that I was doing this valuation of a real estate company, which is unlisted. But when I was trying to validate the numbers, I also looked at the relative valuation, and I was trying to compare it to the listed real estate commercial properties or the companies which are into the commercial property business. So I picked DLF, I picked Oberoi Realty, I picked Godrej Properties. But then all of these companies had got certain different capital structure, different level of business and all that stuff. Like if you look at the DLF is into both commercial property and also residential property. And if you look at the other players, there is a possibility that it is not too much into the high-end commercial property. Like if you go to the Gurgaon segment, the DLF is pretty much out there, which is considered pretty good. That's a classic place. So that's a premium segment. But if you go somewhere closer to the Indira Gandhi International Airport, then you've got very, in fact, even better high quality commercial property. So would it be wise to compare a commercial property which is there in Gurgaon with the commercial properties which are there in
No,
the IGA? Probably not. So the thing is that when I said pick the right players, you need to look at the business model of those companies.
but
Right. Then
then
eventually, what will happen that we may not even have a single player with which we can compare directly our business. So
definitely,
we end up
definitely.
taking some assumptions, a high level assumptions around it, and we would compromise on that and we would relax that a little.
Okay. In case we are not available with the precise comparables as you said in the example, then we need to discount it also, no? Like if we
Definitely,
are
we need to do that. Let
on
me take an
basis of size.
example.
Yes.
Definitely, let me take an example. Say all of you must be aware of this Paytm business,
Yes.
right? So Paytm and very similar to that, Airtel Payment Bank is also there.
Yes.
Airtel Payment Bank got this license after Paytm. So because Paytm was more like a pioneer in the industry. And when Airtel Payment Bank entered, Paytm was already leading the entire market. It was a market. It was the market leader at that point in time, and there was no close player which was closer to Paytm. So what happened at that point in time that some investors invested some money in Paytm, and the valuation of Paytm was available in public domain. So we were aware of this fact that Paytm is having so many subscribers, and has got this kind of a valuation because it was pretty much there in the news. But the point is, if I use a relative valuation and I pick the precedent transaction of Paytm for doing valuation of Airtel Payment Bank or for doing valuation of some other wallet company or some other similar company, probably it is wrong because Paytm, if at that point in time, just throwing an example, say if it was having 100 million subscribers and the other company for which we are doing the valuation is having only 5 million subscribers, then it's not a comparable.
It's not a comparable.
Then we don't have any other choice. We have only one company. So if we are using relative valuation, we would go with it. But at the same time, I would probably discount it by 50%. So if the value that I get by using the multiple assigned to Paytm, if that gives me a valuation of Airtel Payment Bank of say $10 million, I would say no, it is not 10. Reduce it by 50%. It is 5 million.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Anybody could argue that why 50%, why not 70, why not 30?
And it's a
It's
subjective
very
matter.
subjective. It's very subjective. We have to justify this fact by giving color to the assumptions that we have taken. Like number of subscribers could be one basis, and some other
Right.
factors could also be considered. So at the end of the day, there is a lot of subjectivity involved in the relative valuation.
Definitely.
So I personally don't prefer to use.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Right. Okay, so that completes the relative valuation by using the comparables of the trading multiples. Now let's look at the transaction comps, which means that you pick the multiples on the basis of deals which have happened in the market. Like I was taking this example of a flat. I am looking to buy one flat and I go to that locality and I see that there was this other flat which was sold for so and so price. So that's more like a transaction comp, right? So here also that if there are a couple of transactions which have happened in the recent past, pick the deal multiples, meaning the multiple at which the deal happened, and use that as the basis for your valuation, right? But here you should pay consideration to the fact that the deals that you're picking are directly comparable, right? And should have happened in the recent past. But today, if you ask me that, can I use the deal multiples in the current time? Probably this would be the worst method because whatever transaction happened 6 months back would not give you a proper sense of the current market situation, right? Because now you see that if the deals have to execute as of now, these deals would happen at a lower price. That's why you would see that these days, because of the lower valuation, a lot of companies are going for buyback because they believe that now the valuation of the companies have gone drastically down. So it is a good time to go for an acquisition or even go for a buyback of my own shares. So what happens is that if you need to pick the deal multiples, try and pick something which is pretty recent and make sure that there is nothing abnormal which has happened in that particular period, right? So if you see that I've got 2018, 17, and 16, so if I have to probably pick, I would only pick these two and nothing else, right? But if you notice that if nothing major has changed in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of the business environment, probably 17 is also good and 16 could also be taken. But obviously, that requires us a good understanding of what has happened in these years, whether any of these multiples can be used for the valuation as of today or not, right? So let's say I'm going to use all and compute the average. Average EV to sales is this, and it's this 1.92, 11.24, 30.96. And if I apply EV to sales multiple, it is 1.9. EV to EBITDA multiple is 11.2, and PE multiple is approximately 31. So if you apply the latest sales on it from the P&L, my current sales is 887, and if at this price, if at this stage the deal has to happen, then probably the share price would be pretty high. But let me look at the EBITDA level as well that I'm having as of today. That's close to about 128, and the profit that I've recently generated from my business in the last year is quite high, 41. So what's the formula that I've put in here? This one. Right? And for the other four cells, I could straight away copy and paste from here. So if you want, you could straight away copy from this range and paste it here because the logic is the same. You're just trying to, apply the multiple on the previous two cells and then taking the same net debt and formula for market cap and share price. So I've used the same formula going down. And finally, for share price also, you can take it. So you'll see that on the basis of precedent transactions, I'm able to figure out that a price should be close to about $12, $13, approximately $12 to $13. And this is what this tells us. Right? So that's about the relative valuation. Now, yes, Abhijit, these are comparable companies. If these are not the companies which are being acquired in this case, those companies are basically the comparable companies. And this information you basically get from the public domain. So whenever a deal is done, the companies tend to declare that the deal has happened at this so and so price. Because these days also, the Reliance Industries Limited is a classic example. When a lot of players, investors invested in the Geo platform, it was announced that this much amount has been put in for a stake of so and so percentage. So from there you get the deal multiples. That's usually available. And just in case it is not, then also you can use it. But if you use the databases like Bloomberg or something like that, which are paid data sources, over there you get it very easily. So you don't have to do proper research for it. Right? So this gives you a broad idea that what is the current level of sales, what is the current level of EBITDA, and what multiple has been given. Now, this can again be misleading. Like Aman, I'm trying to answer your point. So let's say there is this company, A acquired B. This company was acquired at a deal multiple of or a EV to sales multiple of 2.2 times. But let's say there is this other company which was acquired at EV to sales multiple of 7 times. Now that 7 times appears to be pretty high, but the point is there is a possibility that this other company that I'm talking about is a startup company. It is in a growing stage, and next year it is expected to grow drastically. That is why the latest sales multiple is pretty small. The latest sales is pretty small because of which the multiple is pretty high, right? So, in this case, ignorance could lead to destruction of value. So please make sure that whatever value you use here, you have very solid understanding of what is there in that particular group. Otherwise, it's just going to be a plain number. In Excel, you can do anything, but logically, you wouldn't be able to use it. So, Vishakhi, the point is yes, whether it is transaction comps or trading multiples, these valuations are only indicative in nature. So I would always rely on DCF, or it could only help me to get a broad sense of where valuation should land. Right? Okay, so that's it from my side on this file. No, both would never match, Vishakhi. That is a different approach. This is a different approach. Both would never match. It's only to give you get a broad idea, and in fact, DCF also gives you a broad sense. There's no perfect method which gives you an exact value. So, Riddhi, while doing these comps, are we supposed to get the universe first and then benchmark the multiples? Yes. What happens is like I can discuss about my experience when I used to work in the company using the Bloomberg terminal. So if I'm looking at an FMCG company, I would enter that I'm looking for transaction comps based on the deals which have happened in the US market in FMCG sector from January 2019 to December 2019 with a market cap between 100 crores to 500 crores. You can put all of that and then it'll automatically, cull out all the days which have happened. And using that universe, you can identify that which particular transaction is relevant to the big or not. So that's how you do. So Prachi, these methods are only indicative while the negotiation when you sit on the table, the negotiations happen on the basis of your own understanding about the industry. Like if I am in this business for pretty long and I'm trying to use the relative valuation, and that gives me a value of say $15 a share, and DCF is giving me $20 a share or $30 a share. And these two are just indicative for me because I would have a certain number in my mind. And I would be pretty sure that if I go with this kind of an acquisition, I wouldn't be willing to pay more than this. And in fact, that's the precise point that I'm going to discuss today in the second half when we would speak about the mergers and acquisition modeling. So that's how the mergers and acquisition related part decision is discussed. When you are sitting on the negotiation table, it is not just this value, but also you consider whether the deal is accretive for the shareholders, even if you pay an extra price. Because many a times a higher price is paid not because for the current business, but because of the potential that we would have, which we would be able to unlock after going for that acquisition. So that's the basis on which the valuation is done. Like Geo platform today may not be lucrative enough, but it opens a huge potential for the future business. So that's how you may decide to even pay a higher price, right? So Zian, easy to work backwards. So if you say that you've already decided a price that you want, then obviously you adjust the numbers in such a way, you adjust the projections in such a way that the value is such that you need. But obviously that's not recommended. Does the currency inflation deflation taken into account? Uh, so if you're talking about a cross-border integration, and over there we basically assume a constant currency and then proceed, because any impact of currency up and down would disturb the overall valuation. Because if you are doing the valuation of the core business, and currency fluctuation shouldn't be impacting your particular business, because you could always take a hedge for it. So you take a fixed number for the exchange rate, keep it constant, and then proceed accordingly. Right? Yes, Meher, you're right. You're right. The statement that I mentioned is correct. While looking at the comparables, you should try to look at the companies in the same domain with a similar set of turnover, and not the exact one, but yeah, broadly of the same size. All right. So that's it from my side on this file. Let's take a small break of 10 minutes and be back, and then we'll proceed with the file number 11 on the sensitivity analysis, and then we'll move on to the next topic for the day, which is mergers and acquisition modeling. Right. So let's take a break for 10 minutes and be back there. Thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm back. So let us move ahead to 11, um, complete this model, and then we move on to the whether it is mergers and acquisition model, right? So please open file number 11, and here in this file, we are going to talk about the concept of sensitivity analysis. Now, what we mean by sensitivity analysis is, please open file number 11. What we mean by sensitivity analysis is that we're trying to evaluate the impact of changes in some variables on one of the outputs. So, like in this example, when I did the DCF value or the DCF share price is US dollar. If I go back to the valuation sheet, it tells us that it was about $13.5, right? So the DCF share price is $13.5 per share. I want to figure out that if I change some assumptions, what impact will it have on the final share price? That can be done by using an Excel functionality called data table. So data table is basically used for running sensitivity analysis in any financial model. What we have to essentially do for running a sensitivity analysis in the model is that you create this kind of a table, which is totally blank right now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to first of all identify the parameters which I want to change. Like if I take you back to the valuation sheet, the majority of the value is driven by, if you see, the majority of the value is driven by the terminal value. And how do you compute the terminal value? The terminal value, as per the Gordon growth model, is that you use the terminal year cash flow multiply by 1 plus growth rate, which is the terminal growth rate, divided by the weighted average cost of capital minus growth rate. So there are three variables that we typically use over here. One is the terminal year cash flow, second is the terminal growth rate, and the last is cost of capital. Now, terminal year cash flow is basically driven by the financial model that I have prepared. So, if you would like to pick any parameter in terms of the assumptions that we took for arriving at the cash flows, you could pick that. Or the two key variables that we basically try to maneuver in the terminal value is basically related are basically the terminal growth rate and the cost of capital. So what I'm going to do here that I'm going to change the inputs related to the terminal growth rate and the weighted average cost of capital. So what you could do, this is about 10.3% that we computed. If I increase the decimal places, I'll show you. This is roughly about 10.25%. What I'm going to do, I'm going to probably start with 9%, 9.5%, 10, 10.5, 11, and 11 and a half. You could increase the decimal place over here. It is about 9, 9.5, 10, 10.5, 11, 11.5. I'm just trying to, change that, excuse me. If this particular cost of capital data or the input changes, then what impact is it going to have on the final share price, which is 13.5 right now? And on the same lines, if I look at the terminal growth rate, that's about 5%. So what if I take 3%? What if I take 3.5, 4, 4.5, something like that, right? So here also I'm going to increase the decimal places just to be able to see that what are the numbers that I'm taking here. So I'm taking 3.5%, 4%, 4.5, 5, 5.5, and 6. So I'm just trying to, work out that if terminal growth rate changes, then the share price also changes. Obviously, that's going to be the case, but in which direction? In the same direction or in the opposite direction? It is going to change in the same direction. So I'm going to, see that if I change the terminal growth rate, then the overall share price would also change in the same direction, meaning the increase in the terminal growth rate increases the share price, a decrease in the terminal growth rate decreases the share price. And if I talk about the other stuff, that if the WACC changes, then share price changes most likely in the opposite direction, in the reverse direction. Yes, Abhishek, you're right. Right. So I'm just trying to prove this point here, that we have listed out certain parameters or inputs for terminal growth rate and the weighted average cost of capital. At the intersection point, I'm going to give a reference to the cell which includes its $13.5 share price, which is there in the cell D34. I'm going to call that value over here, and please make sure that you don't hard code this particular value. This value needs to be called from the valuation sheet. That is essential that you call it from, right? So please make sure that you call it from there. And now we have the data ready with us. Right? Now, what do we do next? After this, we have done this, you have to simply select the table like this. So starting with 13.5, simply select the entire table. And once you've done that, please go to data. And in the data, go to what if analysis, go to data, what if analysis, data table. And if you see, if I put my cursor over here, you will notice it mentions that it is used to see the result of multiple inputs at the same time. And this is exactly what we are doing. We're trying to see the result, which is the share price. When I change the inputs related to the terminal growth rate and the weighted average cost of capital. So this is what I'm trying to do over here. To click on this, it's going to ask you two parameters, the row input cell and the column input cell, which means that what is the input that you're using in a row. In the row, I have put in the terminal growth rate. And where is that cell wherein the base input is included? My base input of terminal growth rate is included in the cell D76. So D76 is my row input cell. Because this data table is going to ask you that where is the cell which includes the base input right now, which has been used to arrive at 13.45. You provide that and it gives you the result corresponding. Then in the column input cell, it's going to ask you that which cell has got the base input of the weighted average cost of capital. So that is there in D78. So you give D76 in the row input cell, D78 in the column input cell, and press OK. You see that this table has been created automatically for us. So this is how this data table works, that just on a single click, it picks the inputs from all of these data points which are given here for the terminal growth rate and also the weighted average cost of capital, and it is going to give you the corresponding result, which is your share price. And if you look at one of the rates, let's say I fix the weighted average cost of capital as 10%, and you see as I increase the terminal growth rate, the share price also increases. And if you fix the terminal growth rate
Lost you, Amardeep.
Can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me? All right, so fair enough. Okay, I see that you lost my voice in between. Okay, video. Just trying to open it again. I think there was some internet connection. Hope you can see the screen as well, and also me, and also able to hear my voice. All right, perfect. Thank you. So let me just do a recap of what I discussed. So here I was just trying to show that how you could use the data table functionality for running this kind of a sensitivity analysis out here. So the way to do that is if I do it again, what I was discussing that you simply select this entire table, which has got the inputs to be changed and the final output on which the impact needs to be seen. So the final output is $13.5 of share price on which the impact has to be seen. Select the table, go to data and click on what if analysis data table. It is going to ask you to provide two parameters. One is the row input cell, which means that what is the data you've got in the row. The row I've got the terminal growth rate. The terminal growth rate is given as 5% in the base input out here. And in the column, I've got the weighted average cost of capital, the base of which is given in the cell D70. You need to provide the row input cell as D76 and the column input cell as D78. And that's how it kind of populates the entire table in one go. So what you need to notice over here is that any increase in the terminal growth rate is going to increase your share price, and any increase in the weighted average cost of capital reduces your share price. So there is an inverse relationship out here. So when you cut what this is doing, this is basically trying to tell you that right now you've taken 5% and 10.5, but if any of these inputs were to increase or reduce, the kind of typical range that you get. So you see that the minimum, I've got almost 36 values here for terminal growth rate and 6 inputs for VAT. So at a minimum level, I'm getting a price of roughly about $8.50, and at the maximum level, I'm getting a price of 24.5. So if everything goes in my favor, the price will be approximately $24. And if it goes against me, then the minimum price that I could expect from my company is $8.50. So this is what it tells you, that when you are sitting on the negotiation table, this will give you a bit of guidance that the minimum price is 8.4, the maximum price is 24.5. So try to negotiate somewhere in between. And if you take a high level average of all of that, that also is close to about 13.5, which means that our price is fairly okay and we are very close to it. Right? So that completes the valuation using DCF and relative valuation, and also the sensitivity analysis covering the DCF part. I hope this is clear to all of you, but honestly speaking, this valuation is such a vast topic that we can keep on discussing more and more about it, and this discussion will never end. So, but broadly, whatever important aspects I wanted to cover, I have in this particular part. So, Venkata, there is no single book that I would recommend for it, but yeah, there are a couple of books which are pretty good, and I have read it a lot. So, there's this book on valuation by Damodaran. It's a pretty nice book, and if you look at it, Damodaran has covered. It's basically considered as the valuation guru across the globe. So, if you need to revisit any concept, you could go through that. I'll just type the name in the chat window for your reference. It is a valuation by Aswath Damodaran. He's basically a professor in Eastern University. It's a very nice book. And other than that, specific to India, there is this book given in the folder as well, which I had shared a couple of days back. So, which is the Valuation Insights by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. So that also is pretty good. Yeah. All right. Yes, Zian, you're right. The Damodaran website gives some data on the companies. You're right. It gives a lot of information about the valuation aspects. Okay, so that's it from my side on the valuation, and I hope that you've got the broad gist of what we had to cover in this topic related to the financial modeling creation from scratch, and then using it for valuation purpose as well. So let's move on to the next topic. Let me take a pause here for 2 minutes for you to allow to open the next set of files that we are going to discuss. Now we're going to talk about the concept of mergers and acquisitions. So please make sure that you have the 5 Excel files available with you related to the mergers and acquisition modeling. So please make sure that you have the 5 Excel files related to MN, and please open that. So I'll just be here for 2 minutes, and I'll give you 2 minutes to open those files and have it downloaded in case you don't have it readily available. And as always, I'm going to save all of these Excel files in the same Google Drive link after the class is over. So the class is going to get over close to 3 o'clock. So latest by 3:30, I'll be able to put the files that Google Drive link. So you can go to that link to download the solved version of these Excel files that we're discussing. Right? So please let me know in case you don't have any of those Excel files. Yes, Jan, I just saw your question. You're right. You could use that information. Now, Bodhran gives a lot of information on this website, which is typically used by many people across the globe for conducting valuation. So, yeah, Zian, I mentioned this point that you could use median, you could use simple average. So, obviously, if you use different average method, then the result is going to be different. So, I specifically mentioned this point over there that I would use a simple average if there are no outliers. But there is no problem if you would like to use median. Like in this sheet, if you notice, I've used median over there. So when you get the next point is to you need to please open that MNA file number 1. So there is this file called par01 MNA. Yeah, fine, fine. All right. I hope all of you have opened the MNA participant file number 1. Before I take you to the Excel file, I just want to take 2 minutes to walk you through the case study that we're going to talk about now, the next 3 hours. So, what we are going to do in this case study is basically whenever a mergers and acquisition deal happens, then what kind of analysis is done? What is the sequence in which we do the analysis? Obviously, the valuation is an important part. Financial modeling is equally important. But when it comes to M&A, there is an additional bit of analysis that we have to do, right?